If you're a super sensitive person, then you probably feel that growing up in this world can be brutal. Perhaps you've even felt like your sensitivity is a curse. But what if there is a way to turn everything on its head? What if you could channel that sensitivity in a way that meant it became your superpower? Well, on today's episode, we're talking with Belinda Noakes, founder of TinyBrave, where you get to do just that. In this in-depth conversation, you'll hear Belinda's heart-rending story of growing up as a super sensitive human and how the death of her sister brought on an internal lockdown. You'll hear about the moment she had a deep realization that turned her life around and what Belinda discovered about the phenomenon of heart lock in highly sensitive people. You'll also discover what her heart lock map is and how you can unlock yours, and how sensitivity can become your superpower. This and much more. Now, whether you feel you're a super sensitive person, a highly sensitive person, an empath, an overgiver, or simply someone on the awakening path, however you define it, if your sensitivity is causing a challenge in your life right now, there are truly healing insights in this episode. Now, as ever, you can find the show notes for this episode at www.beabrillianthuman.com/149. That's 149 because it's episode number 149, which also means there are 148 previous episodes for you to go and binge watch. Make sure you subscribe and all that lovely stuff while you're here. So get yourself comfortable and let's dive into your super sensitive self. Curse or superpower with Belinda Noakes. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff, well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed MPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it. Hello and welcome. Today, I'm delighted to have Belinda Noakes here. So I'm going to read your bio, Belinda, before we even let you in. So I love to do that right in front of the interviewee. So Belinda Noakes, over here, is a therapist and coach who's been working with super sensitive clients for over a decade. Belinda is also the ringleader, we're going to have to talk about that, the ringleader of TinyBrave, providing support for super sensitive humans. She's worked for years to understand and embrace her own extreme sensitivity. Belinda says, a few years ago, I couldn't figure out why my own life was still kind of crappy, even after doing, and by the way, folks, this is in full capitals, so much inner work. I can relate. I was convinced there must be something seriously wrong with me. But learning about heart locks and observing how they function opened up real change for me and for the clients I support. Now I'm sharing that wisdom to help other super sensitive humans to unlock your heart, reclaim sensitivity as a superpower, and get on with building the life of your dreams. And I also have to say that Belinda is an MPA mastery graduate and therefore a certified MPA practitioner. Welcome, Belinda. I'm delighted to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
So great to be here, Joel. I'm doing really well, thank you. Given that it's nighttime in Australia.
Yeah, I was going to say, I kind of hesitated, like, how are you doing this morning? Because here it's like 9 a.m. and there it's like, 8 p.m. or something in Australia?
7, just after 7.
7 p.m. It's a crazy world we live in. So I'm excited to talk to you about, we've had some discussions independently about TinyBrave. I love the name TinyBrave, and the work that you do with super sensitive humans, as you call them. So why don't you start by telling us about yourself, telling us about, where did sort of this whole, what is TinyBrave? How did it all start? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So TinyBrave was the name of a blog that I started writing in 2014. And then it went on to be a couple of other things. But the story really starts when I was 16. And the moment that I want to tell you about today was the day of my sister's funeral. So I was 16. My sister, who was 13 at the time, had died a few days earlier. She'd been sick with leukemia for 8 years, and it had been very, very rough on our family. It had been a roller coaster ride. She was in and out of remission 3 times. So, lots of hope and then hope getting dashed. And it was, I was 9 when she was diagnosed. And it was, there was all of the stuff that I was feeling about it. I was the oldest child, felt some sense of responsibility to protect her and keep her safe. So that was tough. But what I didn't realize at the time was that I was feeling all of the family's feelings about it, not just mine. I had no idea that this kind of overwhelming roller coaster of emotions was coming from my mother and my father and my sister, my other sister, and etc. So what I remember about the funeral is it was an unseasonably hot day in the provincial city that we lived in Australia at the time. And the service was going to be in this little chapel at the crematorium, which seated about, I think, 50 or 60 people. And the school brought my sister Virginia's whole year class. So there was like 80 or 90 13-year-old girls there, plus all of our extended family, plus old family friends we hadn't seen for 20 years, all of my friends, etc. So I hadn't cried for a week. Like, I was pretty shut down by that stage. And I didn't want to go into the chapel because I knew it was going to be really intense when I got in there. Didn't know why, but I knew it would be intense. So I was kind of buzzing around outside, greeting old family friends, greeting my friends, etc. And then at some point I realized that my father basically had me by the arm, and he was gently saying, "We need to go inside now." And the minute I stepped across the threshold, like inside the doors of the chapel, it was like diving into a pool. It was like going from air to water. There was this dense, like, wall, or stepping into a bubble of something, just this wall of pain. And I just crumbled and started crying immediately. And then I had to walk all down the center aisle with my father up to the front row where you have to sit if you're the immediate family, with everybody staring at me because everybody else was inside already. And then sat down in the front row with just my dad and my mom and me and my little sister, who was 9. And I remember just feeling like somebody had reached their hand into my chest and was trying to pull my physical heart out of my chest. Like, it was, I've not been tortured in this lifetime, but it reminded me of descriptions that I'd read of torture, like hot needles, like every kind of pain, physical and emotional, that you can imagine all at once. And I had no idea that I was just feeling the whole room. Yeah. So it felt like the service went for 5 hours. I'm sure it wasn't that long. But I was just sitting in the front row with my family, not able to, kind of almost paralyzed by my pain and their pain, and not able to reach out to any of them because we were kind of on display, and also almost not able to move, just essentially just immobilized, like feeling like I was just being torn apart physically as well as emotionally. I've not felt anything like it before or since. So we get to the bit in the ceremony where, in the service where, I mean, it's a crematorium, right? So the coffin has been up the front the whole time on the conveyor belt thing. And there's, I think, one of the most heart-wrenching things in this world is a smaller than adult size coffin. And so somebody presses the magic button at some point, and the conveyor belt starts, and the doors open, and the box slides into the furnace in front of you, which is a super weird moment. And what I remember is thinking, I didn't say it out loud, but thinking, there was, as that happened, there was a real spike in the intensity of emotion in the room. And so all the pain that I was feeling really spiked as the coffin started to move. And I remember just thinking, I will never feel this again.
So
yeah.
I can feel it. What a powerful story. I guess I feel moved, sort of standing in the listener's shoes and hearing that. Just I know I'm sure there's more to come on this, but just at this point, like the degree to which you were experiencing not just your own feelings, emotions, and experience, but also the volume being turned up by your sensitivity to the, from non-personal awareness, we call it the energetic soup that's in the room, which not everybody is sensitive to that or as sensitive, but as you say, super sensitive humans are like fucking on steroids with that stuff. And also, again, I think a lot of super sensitive people, you can tell us whether you think this is true, they may not have a story with a funeral in it, but there'll be something where they've experienced walking into a wall of pain that's not theirs, and where they are dialed in to the soup in the room, which when it changes, you feel like you're being taken by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I interrupted you. Carry on. So the spike we got to.
So there was the spike. And in response to the spike, my declaration was, I will never feel this again. I will never feel this again.
Yeah.
So the service finished soon after the box disappeared, and again, we had to stand up and walk out first with everybody staring at us, which was excruciating. And so I remember getting outside of the chapel, stinking hot day, and turning around, and little details like seeing one of my grandmothers come out of the chapel, and she seriously looked like she'd aged 20 years just in whatever that was, 45 minutes or an hour. She was shorter, smaller. She was kind of crumpled. Anyway, so we got in the cars and went home, and the adults were inside, trying to pretend that they weren't all in shock, and I think starting to have drinks reasonably early in the day. And I went out behind the garage with my friend Tracy, who had come to stay for the night before and come to the funeral with me and stuff. And we smoked illicit cigarettes, and I promptly forgot all about the vow that I had made.
Yeah, that's a really strong vow. That it's like, I will never feel this again. It's a real shutdown moment, understandably.
Yeah. So then we have what I'm referring to as the lost years after that.
I've got quite a few of those. The lost years.
So there was for a while a lot of drinking, and then there was a lot of drug taking, and then there was a lot of other kind of risky and generally kind of self-defeating behavior. a lot of
mystery.
a lot of survivor guilt, a lot of self-punishment for still being alive, a whole bunch of stuff. And eventually, after about 20 years, almost 20 years, I got to a point where it was time to start unpacking some stuff. So, because we had no counselling or anything after my sister died, and we don't do feelings really in my family, so we never talked about it.
Again, I feel this piece of this story is so relatable. We've had conversations. I think my degree of sensitivity was pretty darn high, and I recognize the lost years. We kind of laughed about them, but they're pretty grim. Seemed kind of fun at the time, but all of it was like trying to enforce that vow, that decision to just not engage with the unengageable with at the time, and then finding at some point that the strategies are so bad that you actually begin to realize how self-defeating and painful they are. And again, I imagine, I've not done deep dive analytics on the listeners of this show, but I imagine so many of the listeners of this show in some form can relate to this kind of, it's almost like an archetypal story of the healers of the world that really and the people that end up looking for self-help, they're looking for a solution to go, this fucking hurts, and I've tried just blocking it off. I've tried all these, well, I say drugs,
drowning it,
rock and roll, the whole shebang, or raving. And ultimately you're faced with but there's that wonderful cliche, what is it, need is the mother of invention, and we open our minds and do something different. So what did you do?
Well, I split up with my husband, and it wasn't even, at that point I didn't think I needed therapy. I just so by this stage I was 34, and my husband and I split up, and he was having some difficulty coming to terms with splitting up and kind of catching up with what was essentially my decision.
Mm.
So largely for him, we went to a relationship counselor, psychotherapist person, and we did about 2 sessions together before she said, right, this is no use at all. You both need to come and see me individually. And the first time I saw her on my own, she said, do you realize you hold your breath? And I said, no. And then she hypnotized me. And she did start to unlock something in my breathing. And I saw her for about 18 months. And then I moved away from Australia. I went to Singapore to live, to kind of like start over. And while I was in Singapore, I did a whole bunch of non-conventional stuff, like started fasting and got a lot of really deep tissue body work, and did a lot of detoxing, physical detoxing, and also discovered an NLP-based clearing modality, which then when I moved to London a couple of years later, I went to an event for and then dived in and enrolled in a practitioner's program for that. So then started using NLP, informed tools to process a whole lot of stuff. And it was at one of those retreats, like a weekend retreat, and this was 24 years after Virginia's funeral. We were doing work on vows, and we were in pairs, and in my pair, like the vow that spontaneously came up for processing that I had totally forgotten about until that moment was, the I will never feel this again. And when we released it, my partner reported that she saw this flush of color travel up my neck and into my face, like as if I'd gone from kind of pale, sort of almost gray, to pink in the face. And I felt like a big, energetic release and stuff. It was quite profound. And I was basically ready to declare victory at that point. I thought, oh, sweet, I've got this grief stuff handled. Yeah, so it took probably another few years to figure out. I mean, I then dived into processing, like working the grief stuff from not just the day of the funeral, but from the whole period of Virginia's illness, from diagnosis through to her death. I worked that pretty hard for then about the next 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, so this is that like phase when in your bio where it's having done so much inner work.
Yeah.
I also love that bit there about I've got this handled now. I've talked about this on this show. I do a lot of the time about this idea. Oh yeah, now I've got it handled. That's it. It's done. And it can be very disconcerting, I think is the word I'll use. I think people who come to this point, they find whether it's a modality or an approach or something, and then within it, they're like, that's it. So I'm always very cautious with MPA to go, well, maybe, but really it's about shifting the relationship to that stuff rather than getting rid of it. But yeah, it's a euphoric moment. And,
yep.
so you spend like years just then sort of, I guess one of the things about that though, on sort of on the journey when you go through this kind of path where you have a traumatic experience, you have a shutdown, then you begin to unpack it. There is a phase of unpacking. which, and often people use the word done a lot of work. It is called work for a reason. It can be a lot. So 7 years or so.
So I trained in an NLP based healing modality.
Yeah.
I did a whole bunch of somatic work. I did a whole lot of really deep soul kind of quite some shamanic soul retrieval work.
Yeah.
I did another practitioner certification.
Yeah.
I did hundreds, possibly thousands of hours of, processing. And I wrote 25,000 words called TinyBrave on my sister's diagnosis, my experience of my sister's diagnosis to her death.
Wow.
I did a lot.
So when you wrote, is that like you writing a book, or was it the blog you talked about, or
it was,
or journaling?
I think it was kind of journaling.
Mm-hmm.
It was with a thought of maybe this is part of a book someday.
Mm-hmm.
I did publish a couple of the chapters on the blog at different points, but I printed the book out and, just spiral bound it and gave it to my family one Christmas, gave them a copy each, because there was a whole lot of stuff that I couldn't say to them like I just didn't know how to have the conversation. So I just gave it to them written and printed out. And then it was up to them whether they wanted to read it or not. Yeah.
Did they read it?
I know that 2 of them did. I'm not sure about the third one. Never had confirmation or denial whether they actually read it.
Wow. Did you get any kind of feedback from them at all?
Yeah. So from 2 of them, that they said things like, that must have been really hard to write, and I had no idea, and I had no idea it was like that for you, and I'm so sorry we couldn't talk about it then.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Gosh. So the TinyBrave idea was born as part of this writing project.
Yes, I mean the blog already existed, but then I realized that TinyBrave and TinyBrave was originally about making a TinyBrave move, in the face of extreme terror. Yeah. And for me, that deep diving into the grief was about a series of TinyBrave moves. Yeah. However, what I wasn't really alert to at the time was the whole time that I was doing that deep dive, I was looking for a silver bullet, or the silver bullet, right? I was looking for the process to end all processes, or the modality to end all modalities. Yeah. Like the one thing that is going to finally fix this so I never have to deal with it again.
It's like the sort of dating scene, isn't it, really? Looking for the one where I don't have to do any shit hard work in a relationship. It's just going to be perfect from day one till the day we die. That's kind of how it often goes. We look for we put all the responsibility on the modality or the approach or the therapist or the whatever it is. So what did you I guess we're looking at a realization here, having been on the search for a silver bullet. What happened next?
Well, I mean, so I switched from blaming the modalities to blaming myself. I basically then decided that there must just be something wrong with me, right? It must be something that I'm doing wrong, or that I'm not doing that I should be doing. Or there must be something wrong with me. There must be that must be why all the personal development in the world is not working for me.
Oh, yeah. This is dear to my heart. This is what happens. It's like we turn it on ourselves. Same in a relationship. Like, oh, it's me. I mean, maybe there's some truth to that in relationships, but fundamentally, it's like it's just like taking that projection, that blame, and going, well, if I can't blame you anymore, got to blame me. Painful, painful.
Yeah.
So roll us forward through the pain.
Well, so then, and this is relatively recent, like this is in the last couple of years, right? At one point, I just ended up, well, there was some rage coming up, Joel, and I'd always had this story about, I don't really get angry, I don't have a problem with rage. No, it's not part of my mosaic, right? So there was some rage coming up. It was pointed out to me. Again, not claiming to be super self-aware. So I ended up digging into the rage, and I revisited the 16-year-old version of me. And I remember, I was being facilitated in a formal process by somebody else, a practitioner friend, and I remember my mind going, I've already healed this. It's like, I've done this, processed this to death, right? But what I saw in this particular process was, because I'd made that vow that day, there was a lot of rage that day. I was enraged with God for taking my sister away, and God for being an asshole, and God, the universe, and everyone and everything. I was angry with them. Yeah, it just wasn't fair. And because I'd made that vow, I think from partly from rage, like not just from grief and heartbreak, but partly from rage, that I get a lot of, my soul tends to talk to me in visual metaphors. So the picture that I got was of a bank vault with double vault doors, like the double blast doors, so like big, heavy metal doors with the full locking mechanisms, but two of them. And the first one, the one on the outside, was a door that was partly to keep the rage from leaking out, into the world and any close bystander. But also that was protecting this level of heartbreak that in all of that work that I'd done, I hadn't actually touched yet. So there was a deeper pool of grief that had been protected by this rage barrier. And so there were these two very distinct levels or layers of shutdown. And it was shown to me as a bank vault with these two big, locked doors.
Yeah.
And that visual metaphor fit really neatly with something that I'd started to observe kinesthetically and analytically, and as I was working with clients around this, what I call heart locks. Right now, I'm by far I'm not the first person, right, to talk about heart locks. This is not a new idea. But what I'd been seeing in clients actually was this thing that, it might happen to everybody. I don't know, but I work with a lot of supersensitive humans. So what I'd observed is that particularly with supersensitive humans, there was this weird one-way heart locking happening where love could still get out, because the classic thing with supersensitive humans, right, is that they overgive, in fact. But there's one or more layers of protection from potential heartbreak, which means the love can't get back in. So there's no circuit happening. So you're not getting back what you're giving out to the world.
Mm.
And that has implications then for being able to receive not just love, but money and basically every other good thing that you want.
Yeah.
So
it's a powerful metaphor. I kind of want to talk about the piece where you say that you hadn't touched that bit until this point in your journey. And I think that's important, because one thing that I'm imagining some people hearing that might do is to relate back to modalities, success and failure. You know this, that from my perspective, it's a pacing story. I think the way to, it's like there's a point where necessarily some things you're, in quotes, not allowed by your system to touch, because if you do, you're going to break, like fundamentally break. And a lot of the forcing that happens in some situations, therapeutic situations, I've seen that literally break people. And I love that there's a mechanism within us that keeps us like a safety valve. And kind of when we're ready, when the other pieces on the board are in place, then we get access. So I'm highlighting that because to help people who might suddenly go into failure, I haven't reached that heart lock yet. It's like, good. The fact that you're hearing about it now maybe means that you're getting close to where you can, if and when you're ready. And there's no failure from my perspective on if you never get to that. That's okay. There are lives that are brilliant and amazing without it. All of us who end up doing the digging and delving and stuff, we have a longing, I would call it, to find those vault doors and open them and see what happens next. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. So there's two things that I want to be really clear about. One is that you're absolutely right. In all of that work that I'd done before, I was building my capacity to encounter suppressed pain.
Beautifully put. Yeah. Beautifully put.
So I don't for a moment think that was actually wasted time or effort. You know, like I choose, the story that I choose to tell about it is that it was perfect timing.
Yes.
All of it. Yeah.
So you got to these vault doors, the heart locks.
Well, so then the next important thing is that then I started to like, okay, so having this really powerful visual metaphor, this, I mean, you know what my mind is like, right? My mind loves a puzzle. My mind likes to make sense of things. So then I started to think, okay, well, so how do these heart lock works? And like, you know, how could you kind of describe them and investigate them and get your arms around them a little bit? Because there was what I sensed in me was that there was some power that I still don't understand. It's quite mysterious still today. There was some power in having my conscious mind get on board with the idea of a heart lock. Maybe it was just that my mind then had a job and so it could relax a little bit. Maybe it was that simple. But anyway, then I started this. So as you know, on one hand, I'm working with clients, so I start to kind of hold the awareness of heart locks as I'm working with them, and lo and behold, I start seeing them everywhere.
Yeah.
And then also I started re-examining particularly the Virginia's illness and death, and I've found not just one heart lock, but multiple heart locks, like all of these multiple instances of shutdown, and not just starting with Virginia's illness. I mean, going back, you know, to when I was born, you know, and even before. And I started to get a sense of what I was doing was actually creating a map of the heart locks in this lifetime. And then it was like visiting old places with new eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the wonderful powers of awareness. Like you get that realization. I suppose for me, in a way, it was similar with MPA. Once I realized the mechanism of taking things personally, how that affects identification, and therefore I was able then to revisit many of the things I'd already looked at through the emotional lens that was through my training. That was the same training we had took, and go,
Yeah.
oh, now I can see it from a different angle. Actually, that gives me an avenue of exploration and opening that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
And as you say, like a map of how all things begin to work together.
Yeah.
So did you so this is like your personal map you did, or was it like have you got like a general map?
I don't have an all-purpose map at this point. I do have a personal map that is, still forming. I'm still adding things to it, but I was just kind of noticing what it felt like to revisit those old places on the map with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And what it was like to go back and do work on those moments of shutdown with this framework of one-way heart locks. And it was just intriguing for me to notice that it seemed to make it easier to it was almost like the idea of a heart lock made the trauma less personal, just having the idea of it available.
Yes. Yeah, which is I'm biased here, but it's a very powerful perspective to see something as less personal.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm generally, I wouldn't, suspicious is the wrong word. I'm cautious with general maps, but what I think, if I understand from our conversations that we've had over the years, and certainly recently in relation to TinyBrave, what you're pointing to, while you have a personal map, it's like having the eyes to see the map and therefore identify the mechanisms that can help others, with your help, identify their maps, which gives them that power. Did I get that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not going to give somebody a pre-drawn map, but I can walk them through the process of drawing their own maps.
Yeah. That's super powerful. And again, as you say, like with super sensitive humans, this is a big deal, part of the core mechanism of suffering. And now you've identified it as like there's a series of things, and then uncovering those heart locks, and then I'm guessing a mechanism to gently, at their own pace, begin to open those and get the gifts that are inside that bank vault.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was good timing that as I was, I didn't actually realize that as I was starting this heart lock exploration. So I wasn't aware of starting the heart lock exploration when I signed up for the MPA mastery training.
A divine alignment.
Indeed. So, I about sort of a year into the heart lock exploration, I suddenly realized that the tools that I had trained it, so the two modalities that I use, NPA is one of them, happen to be particularly well suited to this endeavor of exploring, identifying, describing, coming to grips with, and then unlocking heart locks in a gentle, self-paced way. Yeah. the tools that I'm trained to use, and they're the ones that I use because they worked for me best of all of the things that I've tried. They work really well when you're no longer looking for a silver bullet or a magic wand that is going to fix everything all at once.
Yes. Yeah. So, so you use primarily MPA, and you also use the compassion key. People haven't heard of the compassion key. I'm sure if they Google it, they can find it. But as your sort of tool to help unlock or find and unlock the heart locks in people. So my marketing side wants to ask you how mastery helped. But that's not actually where my heart. So maybe we can talk about it if it's there to talk about later. But I guess at this point in what I really want to know, what I think is really useful to the listener is like, so out of all of this experience, TinyBrave was reborn in what it is now. So I'd love you to, because sitting in my listeners' shoes, I'm like, yeah, how can you help me? I recognize it. You know, what are you doing? How can I get access? What is the setup that facilitates this journey of awareness right now? So tell us about what the sort of entity of TinyBrave and what it is and how you support people through that now.
Yeah. Okay. So TinyBrave in its new incarnation, in its latest incarnation, is new still. There is a free Facebook group that people can join where I do. So every second week I come in and do a 10-minute reset clearing, just like a kind of a, put up a post one day. You can comment on the asking how people are doing, how's your heart. So TinyBrave is for super sensitive humans, right? So if you're a super sensitive human and you feel everything deeply, you can come into the group every other week. I ask you how your heart's doing. You can tell me in a few words or a few lines or whatever, and then I read all of that and just kind of do a 10-minute stream of consciousness group clearing that helps. It's not a deep dive into the roots of things, but it can help to just, letting off steam from a pressure cooker every now and then.
Very useful. Right, put a pin in that because I've realized we've missed a big piece of the puzzle here. Super sensitive human.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, because we're talking about that because we've had lots of discussions, but I'm sort of thinking someone might be going, am I a super sensitive human? Do I, what does that title mean? How are you defining a super sensitive human as distinct from a normally sensitive human, or just talk to that if you will a bit. People can go, okay, is that me?
It's a funny one because the people who I anticipate will see themselves in the super sensitive human kind of label today are people who have either already heard of and are familiar with labels like empath, highly sensitive person, even light worker or starseed, or those kinds of labels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So either that, or possibly if you're not aware of those labels and you've not already put yourself into one of those buckets, then you might just be. You might be the one who was the crier in your family. You might be the one who you might have been the one who so all the kids grew up in the same environment, but only one of them was completely debilitated by trauma and, you know, became a terrible alcoholic or addict or whatever your form of debilitation was, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might have had a disproportionate effect from essentially a very similar set of circumstances to other siblings or family members. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Can I also put in there, just from my own experience, that it's not that it's like you're necessarily unique in your family. So I'm thinking my own family, where I would say all three of us would fall into that bracket. We just did it slightly different ways. But I think all three of us had that sensitive trauma response to the environment at the time. So just to sort of hold that, not to dismiss just this as an experience for you if you have other siblings who are similarly going through this kind of thing.
yes, well, in my experience, super sensitives do tend to cluster together in family groups. There will often be multiple siblings. Although, of course, some people have the experience of being the weird one, the black
Yeah,
sheep,
absolutely. Yeah. And also I think the fact that we've been through your experience in some detail, there are so many clues in there. Like we talked, just to recap it, is like that sense of being highly affected by the room energy, along with your own. Again, that's often labeled as empathy, being empathic. But that's certainly a thing. And then the path of the shutdown to the awakening path often is that kind of thing. You shut down, you go bonkers, and then you start to think, I need to open this up, and you end up going on the awakening path in that way. I think that's pretty common in that field. Okay, so we got the highly sensitive person. Now you got the Facebook group. I'll put a link in the show notes. By the way, the show notes will be www.beabrillianthuman.com/ the number of this episode, which I really should have looked up before. But I'll put it in the intro. Trust me, it'll be in the intro. So you already know what it is, and I'll put it up on the screen as well. Schoolboy error. But go join the Facebook group. There will be you need just you search TinyBrave in groups as well. I think you'll find
absolutely
the group. But
yeah, so it's just a safe space for super sensitive humans to come and get some support from me every other week, but also for us to start having a conversation about some of these ideas. And I have a sense that it could be useful just being able to go into a group and say, I had a really super sensitive moment today. Somebody did this thing that is actually fairly innocuous to me or for me or whatever. And, you know, I burst into tears, or I couldn't stop thinking about it for 7 hours afterwards, or, you know, whatever it was, right? And know that nobody's going to tell you to buck up and get over it. Nobody's going to tell you to stop being so sensitive. In fact, people will just, you know, say, it's all right. You're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, I think those spaces are so important. I mean, and I know that, you know, obviously you've hit the right notes for people to recognize themselves already, because I know that when you set that group up, which wasn't that long ago, it's like there are people sort of coming in droves to join that group. So it speaks to its vibration, let's put it that way, that it's calling people in. But that sort of peer understanding, you know, I think it's important across the board, but certainly for people who are already sensitive, because I think our society is set up to gaslight sensitive people en masse, you know, to really make wrong that sensitivity, you know, coming out of the industrial age. I say coming out, kind of getting there. But the idea of kind of buck up, shut up, you're all nuts anyway, if you're sensitive, it's weak, all the rest of it, and a complete denial of the energetic world. A lot of those last several hundred years has seen the setup where we can just innately feel gaslighted by our environment. So the best route to that, apart from realizing that your experiences are valid, is to have other people support you in that. But also, because I know this is a big part of TinyBrave, to support you in moving from what often is our default position, which is being a victim of the overwhelm, sensitivity, and the gaslighting, into fixing, making, like you said in your experience, something wrong with me, to actually in an empowered way embracing this sensitivity. And I love how you put it, because you help people discover it's the superpower. So tell us about your experience of where you discovered or that you can really hone this super sensitivity from a curse to a superpower.
Yeah, well, so there's two particular examples, right? One is that as I do my work as a practitioner, and you've helped me a lot with both of these, both NPA itself, NPA mastery training, and you as a therapist, Joel, have helped me with both of these. Yeah. So I used to get exhausted when I was doing client sessions because I didn't know that I was doing my old trick that I used to do with my family, where I would just go with all of their pain and pull it into my body and help them process it. I was doing that with clients for the first few years that I was a practitioner. Wow, it was tiring.
That's like the whole thing. That's so matter. That's why I'm going to pause it. And this is a bit of a mastery moment, but I'm passionate about this topic. That the degree to which, as facilitators, therapists, healers, even on subtle levels, we go into our practice with our Velcro suits on and come out at the end of the day covered in other people's fluff and wonder why we're knackered, exhausted, and don't feel inspired to build our practices or see too many clients. And to me, at the core of mastery, yes, you learn all the wonderful MPA tools, but you discover how you can not do that anymore, and everything is easier on you, the client, and it's just like you don't have to pick up all that shit. You have much more energy. So yeah, I had to jump in there because that's like, yes.
Yeah. So that's the first example of, claiming super sensitivity as a superpower, as wearing it as a badge of honor and turning it into something that is useful instead of unhelpful. And the second example is in terms of my relationship to external energies, whether they come from other humans or from elsewhere, from the collective or flying around in the ethers. I used to feel like the world was just constantly attacking me. I used to just feel like I was under attack 24/7. And I don't feel like that anymore. And it's not only has it made it a hell of a lot easier to live my life, but do normal, like regular everyday things like walk into a supermarket. But it also makes me a better practitioner because I'm able to appreciate the level of energetic sensitivity that I have. And I still remember a conversation that you and I had, in a one-on-one session about being able to move to scanning and reading the environment proactively rather than constantly feeling on the back foot and trying to defend and protect.
Yeah, I mean, one of the cores with the MPA training is to start looking a bit like with there's the non-personal taking things personally map, there's your heart lock maps, and the other part of the non-personal is the sort of signal processing map, which is like, how are we processing signals, and to get very refined in helping people to look at those through that lens of, okay, so it's not a fuck up, it's something I can, if I start to use it constructively, what does it become? That's why then you come in with superpowers, and certainly sensitivity, high degrees of sensitivity. If you can take it out of being a curse, someone who loves to work with people, it becomes like a burden, to something which is absolutely a superstar gift that doesn't turn into becoming a dictatorial energy reader, but rather, the sensitivity of facilitation. That's amazing, and it's certainly part of again, I say it's one of my passions is to help people like us to really move the needle on that. And then with TinyBrave, when you told me about TinyBrave originally, I was like, yes, because I think there's a real need for the way that you take people through that process, and sort of create these spaces. Speaking of which, I know you've got, because this is going out in end of November 2022, and I know that in December you've got a webinar coming up. Am I right about that? Which I'm imagining. I'm just going to imagine and hallucinate from it before you tell us what it actually is. I'm hallucinating and imagining that it's a space where you begin to introduce people to what they need to know to get really started on this journey. Did I get that right? Or no, Joel? Do you
Yeah, the first thing that that I'm starting to do, in addition to the Facebook group, is just tell people about these ideas. Yeah, because some people, for some people, just having the information will be enough. I know a lot of practitioners who've done a shit ton of inner work, right? And for a lot of them, just the idea of a heart lock with a little bit of explanation will be enough. And I'm happy, to give people the information. Of course, there will be, if you'd like some support with that, that's what I do, right? So there'll be various options starting from next year, for getting support in groups, one-on-one, etc. But the first thing that we're starting with and December really is essentially, I'm doing a couple of test events just to test, to do the presentation, see how it goes, like see what questions people like, what's missing from how I'm explaining it, what questions are people going to ask, etc. So that'll be happening on the 15th and the 16th of December. One time that works for the US and one time that works for Europe. And again, the link to save your spot for that will be in your show notes.
Will be. And the main website is tinybrave.com. So that's pretty easy. They should be able to find it there, if I'm correct there. And I think you're being a bit humble saying it's a test run. So, because I know, well, a couple of things to say about Belinda, folks, pay attention here. She's an amazing facilitator. And even though she's using that word test, she comes with a wealth of experience. So I think time spent, if you resonate and recognize any of this stuff that we've talked about today, you need to get your ass along and just at the very least join the group, and check out the webinars that are coming up. And if you're listening to to this in the future, because this will be around, chances are she'll already have set up like really powerful support mechanisms to help you through that journey, so you're not alone, right? Because it can be so alone. And with TinyBrave, you're specifically going to be amongst other super sensitive humans who get you, and I think that's so important, and won't gaslight you.
Yeah, it won't tell you that you just need to toughen up. Yeah.
So because I'm aware of the time now, we've rocked on chatting away today. So if there was kind of like, what would you like people to really take away from this chat we've had today?
If you have a super sensitive heart, you are not defective. In fact, it is the opposite, I believe. Of course, I'm a little bit biased, but here's what I believe. All humans actually have the potential to be super sensitive. In fact, I would assert that it is the natural state of a human. The people who see themselves in the description of super sensitive today are the ones who are actually ready to step up now and claim that. And I said before, to wear it as a badge of honor. TinyBrave, there will be t-shirts, right? Because this is going to be like this is going to be like a cool club that you want to be part of. If you were kind of one of those geeks at school, maybe, who enjoy being in clubs, maybe. But you know what I mean, right? I want this to be, TinyBrave wants to be like a badge of honor.
Yeah. I'm willing to take tiny brave steps and embody and embrace the superpower that is my sensitivity. There will be t-shirts. You heard it here first, folks. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Belinda. Great chat. And
thanks so much for having me, Joel. This
my
was
absolute
an awesome
pleasure. And I hope that, folks, go join the Facebook group. Links will be in the description, the show notes for today. TinyBrave.com is pretty easy. I'm going to guess there's a link to your Facebook on there as well, so they can find it. Just TinyBrave.com. That's the one to go to for sure. It's been brilliant. We'll definitely be having you on the show again, Belinda.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website www.babrillianthuman.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the MPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.